Quarter to 9 on a Monday morning, and if you're over 5 and under 16, chances are it's school today. So what's on the menu? Well, for starters, a little bit of maths, main course English, and then a whole family of subjects to get stuck into. And very soon it's history on your plate. You know, history, that school-based subject, all those facts and dates to be learned. But think again, because history is not like that. It's just as much about how to look and where to look for clues and then how to interpret them. And it's not boring because it's about the past, your past. It doesn't matter whether you live out of town, amongst people and traffic, or at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. History's out there waiting to be found. A name here, a date there, old fixtures and fittings, background evidence that do-it-yourself detectives like you can match to the clues which brings history alive for all of us. And those clues are all around us wherever we live and whatever we do. That special letter we may collect and, a pile of old newspapers, stories swapped, childhood memories, and of course, the changes we make to our houses and to our lifestyle. And then there's those photos, each one a fragment of history held in snapshot. Taking photos. Of course history is fun, and that's what this film's all about, developing those skills through the environment around us, skills which will help us to understand and enjoy the past and perhaps plan for a better future. To prove what you can find in just a short time, I asked the Hadwin family to spend a couple of days tracking down their family history and looking at the things in and around their house here in Cumbria.
I'm Rosemary Hadwin, and I've lived here at Station House Ramside for 7 years. It used to be the station master's house. This is my family: Christopher, my husband, Katie, who's 7, Rebecca, who's 11, and Bronwyn the dog, who's 4 years old and came from Anglesey.
The Hadwins started by getting together all the family photographs they could find and sorting them out into a timeline. Even if you can only go back a few years, using snaps to put together a family tree like this gets you remembering your past and having fun researching it.
Now, photograph of Grandad Tommy. That's Dad's dad. And that is the actual steam engine, traction engine, that Grandad made on his own.
Nowadays, you wouldn't recognise the Hadwins' place as a station, but a few old photographs help to visualise what it used to look like. Even if the 545 from Barrow didn't wheeze and clank its way down your street, I bet you can find out about changes made to the places you live. Or, if it's new, what was on the land before it got built over. And don't forget the things you've bunged into the shed or tucked away at the back of a cupboard. They might not be of any use these days, but fishing out old objects and chatting about them can paint a whole picture of what homes used to be like, even a short time ago.
History, to my mind, isn't Vikings and Romans. It's 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So that is history to a child who's only 5 years old. It's before their lifetime. So there's plenty around, even in your own home.
And what about the souvenirs you've kept over the years? Things on your shelves that remind you of people and places. There's probably a memory attached to each, and remember, these tales from our past are chapters in our children's history books. But history at home isn't just about the houses we live in or the things we've got tucked away. Never underestimate what's to be found around you wherever you live. Now, land use of open spaces like this and the buildings that surround them or you are always changing, and they're well worth investigating. Why, even the everyday journeys we make, each one tells a story. So get out there and identify where there's been changes in the past and even where there may be changes in the future. And don't just rely on clues found when you go walkabout. Sometimes you get a better view on a car or bus journey. Just how much have the streets you drive through every day changed since you've known them? For Katie and Rebecca Hadwin, the Monday morning bus journey to school floods them with clues. Everywhere has its own history to be discovered. Try it for yourself where you live. Out in the country where there's not so many houses, it might seem that nothing much has changed and that you won't be able to find the clues. But first appearances are deceptive. There's plenty to find even in a small area. So I asked another family, the Garners, to spend a winter day looking out the history of the people and buildings in their village.
My name is Linda Garner. This is my daughter Emily, who is 10 years old. This is Orton Village where we live, and my husband John is at home cooking the lunch.
For Linda and Emily, first stop was the local church. From a look around the outside, you can get an idea of how much the building has changed or been extended, perhaps a sign of how a village grew. Inside, there's an easy-to-read encyclopedia of information about our population from the past. And not just in the books of copperplate handwriting, which record births, marriages and deaths. How about the memorial boards and tablets round the church? Tales of wealth. What happened to it? Stories of poverty and charity. Questions answered and more to ask.
You can make a full historical investigation of the church, trace families back, perhaps look at the records within the church, and onto the church themselves. There are often interesting bits of history there, which again is local history.
I think Linda Garner was surprised at how much their detective work turned up in a short time.
What it did do was to actually show us all that we've got an awful lot of interest around in the area, and perhaps we don't take as much interest as we ought to, and yet history is there on our very doorstep, and we ought to make full use of that.
But if the inside of a church tells you about the community, the gravestones outside tell you of the families and the individuals, the little stories of aunts, uncles and cousins, of infant deaths and of great age. Why, the shape and form of these different tombstones tells me that here the historical record goes back a long way. And if you're lucky, on a single stone there can be a whole history book, complete with dates. These pages of detail carved in stone are just as important as the snapshots we take and collect today. Sacred to the memory of Charles, eldest son of William Stanley of Masborough, Yorkshire, a contractor on the Lancaster-Carlisle Railway who was killed by a wagon running over him on the 16th of August 1846 near the South Loon Bridge on the above railway, age 21 years. just the distant past that's worth remembering. With a hobby like Chris Hadwin's fascination for bikes, there's stories to tell.
The same year as that, you say, same number, 97.
Add a scrapbook and you've got a miniature archive to dip into.
Occasionally.
Whatever you do, don't keep it to yourself. Let your children know how important the scrapbook is, and you might have saved a little bit of history from bin or bonfire.
Well, that's because of Yamaha. Probably when I was about 15, I was given a motorbike that wouldn't run. I'd always been keen on bikes anyway. I got that going, and that was just the start of it then. I ended up buying a Norton, actually, and went faster and faster on the road till it got to the point of being a bit dangerous. Oh, that's the Kawasaki, isn't it? That's the two-stroke, three-cylinder two-stroke.
Where's that?
Yeah, that's at Flukebury. For you, actually, but you did the Southern 100 was your first. And once you'd had a taste of it, that was it. There was no... You couldn't stop then. Just about to avoid that pile up there.
Did you fall off?
Not on that day, I don't think, no.
At the Garners, Emily and her dad wanted to take a closer look at a couple of the older buildings in the village to see if they could find some clues. I wondered if John Garner thought this approach to history was as worthwhile as learning dates and facts, 1066 and all that.
The dates and the facts are important because I think we all need that basis of fact and knowledge, but I think then to go off and do investigation, either by talking to Grandad or walking around the village, should develop an interest. And I think once they've found the solution themselves, it should stick.
If you're looking at buildings, the best places are the ones that have been altered over the years.
I think once we deliberately walked out the house to go and look at the history in the village, that we found that we were instinctively finding it. In fact, we were looking for it deliberately. And then you realise that there's a wealth of it there.
Separate building to the hotel rooms, wouldn't it?
And the windows are completely different, aren't they?
They are, aren't they? Those windows are different to the hotel building. Yeah. Perhaps that would be the reception area or something for the guests when they came.
Where you can see windows, doors and other features added or blocked up, you've got more chance of working out how the use of the place has changed.
So how did you get it?
At Station House, Rebecca was onto another history trail. She asked a relative to come and talk about childhood more than 60 years ago. A few family souvenirs got the stories flowing.
We didn't have duvets on the bed either.
It's extraordinary how much history is tucked away in the memories of an older person. Often we never think to ask, and valuable information just fades away.
Of cotton and covered both sides.
118 railway Terence with his mother, father, 4 brothers, a sister.
But it's not just real memories that give us an idea about the past. Storybooks can set historical details in a context which is easy to understand.
To work to help their families. Ginger found a job.
Rosemary Hadwin is a fan of this kind of bedtime read.
Found a job as an assistant miller at
History can be done through stories. Books that refer to 10, 15 years ago, a history. Therefore, reading a book with a child, looking at the difference in clothes, the difference in costumes, the difference in buildings, cars, buses. It can all be used, and it might be an interesting story, but it's also got a lot of historical content.
One hood near 2 babies, so one of them's going to get very wet. Look at the steamship as well.
After just a couple of days, the Hadwins and the Garners were surprised at how much historical evidence they'd found on their own doorstep. Clues which they'd felt had opened their eyes and made them much more knowledgeable about the past around them and given their children whole new topics of conversation. Back at school where we started, and it's here the whole thing begins to come together and we reap the benefits of that little bit of local study. By the time I visited them, the class was well into a study unit on the Victorians, doing research into parish records, completing a building survey and compiling information from reference books. Did the History at Home project have a contribution to make to this national curriculum history? I asked their head teacher, Jennifer Hodgkinson.
What they have at home and what they're able to tell their children supports very much what we do here, and I think it encourages them to realise that they are part of it, that history is part of their life, really.
But this History at Home approach could take up a lot of time. Fine if you've got it, but parents are busy people and don't always have the opportunity to prepare like we had. Was there a basic recipe Jennifer could recommend? Something a family could do when they got a few days off?
Children have holidays, and in those holidays parents often say that they don't know what to do with their children because they're bored. And it seems to me that it's far more fun to get out the big box of photographs that have never been catalogued and look at those together and point out the history of your family. And I'm sure that in nearly every household there are artefacts from different ages which we now use as ornaments and which we could look at together.
Looking around the classroom, I could see one or two things in the display which linked to things the families have been talking about at home. But if you're stuck, maybe a visit to a local museum could get the detective work going. However you start, I think it's important to keep young people in touch with their past so they begin to understand and value who they are and where they came from. Not only have you helped make history more enjoyable, but you and your family have become a part of living, moving history, and you've developed those skills of seeking for the clues and then through discussion endeavouring to find out more exactly what they mean. But most exciting of all, you have gathered new information about the past based on objects, buildings and people, and seen how the whole historical environment has come together and yet is always on the move.
If you enjoyed watching this programme and would like to do some history detective work in your own local area, you may like to know that English Heritage Education Service has produced an illustrated History at Home book to go with the film. The book describes in detail many of the ideas outlined by David Bellamy and includes suggestions on how to start looking at different types of buildings and localities. There's also a guide to collecting oral history and advice on recording stories about the past from relatives and friends. Both the History at Home book and video are available from English Heritage Education Service, 429 Oxford Street, London, W1R 2HD.